The true church, a light in the world. The true church, a light in the world, is a production of the ministry Answers, providing scripturally based answers for life's questions. It is produced for the purpose of providing understanding of God's church to the seeking person. It is written and recorded by evangelist Jacob Giesbrecht. Carnal direction. There will always be some carnality in the church. And for proper order to be in the church, there will have to be spiritual people who will teach carnal people as described in Hebrews 5. It is not necessarily wrong to be carnal. For 1 Corinthians chapter 3 simply declares them babes in Christ. They were saved but had not grown into spirituality. They were not wrong for having begun as carnal, but they were wrong for staying carnal, as God also rebukes the Christians for remaining carnal in Hebrews chapter 5. Carnality is a state God's people are supposed to move on from. Realistically, they should grow out of it into a state of spirituality or spiritual maturity. What does the word carnal mean? Here's what the Greek lexicon says: having the nature of flesh, under the control of the animal appetite, governed by mere human nature, not by the Spirit of God, having its seat in the animal nature or aroused by the animal nature. Human, with the included idea of depravity pertaining to the flesh, to the body, related to birth, lineage, etc. One could say that it is simply the opposite of being spiritual, and that is right. However, it must be explained in a deeper way to be understood properly. It is being fleshly, natural, human, but what must be understood is this: no human is ever motivated, driven, energized, and influenced solely from within, either from within his own person or from humanity altogether. There is always at least one outside source that causes the happenings, decisions, and actions in people. This is why the definition of carnality connects to animals. It is animal-like desires, ideas, and ways that drive the human beings. So, yes, it is fleshly, but where the flesh is actually connected and what it is connected to is what drives a person to oppose God and be opposed by him. While the carnal person is rooted in the animal, natural, humanistic world, the spiritual person is rooted in God. There is a channel that flows from God to every person, and the level of spirituality will determine the blessings, provision, understanding, etc. What must also be mentioned here is that spirituality starts with a decision that initiates a connection between the person and God. In other words, when a person places his attention toward God in an attitude of repentance and a cry for deliverance, he enters into a life of spirituality. The person that comes to the realization that he does not stand or even exist as a single entity, that he cannot even stand, exist, or survive together with the entire human race, that even the entire human race is incomplete and insufficient on its own, that there is an insufficiency within him, not so much physically, but yes, physically also, but in the matter of being influenced and controlled to some extent from outside sources. This person has placed himself in a position to discover the truth about life. We naturally think that the answers to life's issues are within us. When we feel incomplete, empty, irritated, etc., we do an inward search, first into ourselves personally and then within the entirety of the human race. But what we need is not within us. The fact that a person can be carnal proves that he can also be godly. If he can draw influence, encouragement, and strength from the carnal world, then he can also draw the same from the spiritual world where God is governing. I said that all churches have some carnality. That is true. But there must never be carnal direction. When the leadership in the church is carnal, then the organization is destined to fall into carnality. Let's consider what the Bible says about carnality, and then I will seek to make the point that this argument is purposed for. Carnality, according to the Bible, is the natural human nature. For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold under sin, Romans 7:14. The natural human thinking. For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Because the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, nor indeed can be. Romans 8, 5-7. Immature Christianity. And I, brethren, could not speak unto you as unto spiritual, but as unto carnal, as to babes in Christ. I fed you with milk and not with solid food, for until now you were not able to receive it. And even now you are still not able. 1 Corinthians 3, 1 and 2. Division in Christianity. For you are still carnal. For where there are envy, strife, and divisions among you, are you not carnal and behaving like mere men? For when one says, I am of Paul, and another, I am of Apollos, are you not carnal? 1 Corinthians 3, 3 and 4. The earthly possessions we handle. It pleased them indeed, and they are their debtors. For if the Gentiles have been partakers of their spiritual things, their duty is also to minister to them in material, carnal things. Romans 15:27. The earthly weapons we fight with. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for pulling down of strongholds. 2 Corinthians 10:4. The Old Testament earthly ceremonial system. Who has come not according to the law of fleshly carnal commandment, but according to the power of an endless life. Hebrews 7:16. Concerned only with foods and drinks, various washings, in fleshly carnal ordinances imposed until the time of Reformation. Hebrews 9, verse 10. Immoral intercourse and reproduction. And they called to Lot and said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them carnally. Genesis 19:5. Moreover, you shall not lie carnally with your neighbor's wife, to defile yourself with her. Leviticus 18:20. Whoever lies carnally with a woman who is betrothed to a man is a concubine, and who has not at all been redeemed for given her freedom. For this there shall be scourging, but they shall not be put to death, because she was not free. Leviticus 19:20. The reason I say immoral intercourse and reproduction is because the word that is translated carnally is generally translated seed, referring to the seed of reproduction. God is pro-reproduction and totally in favor of people engaging in intercourse. But when his moral standards are compromised in it, then it is carnal. It is not carnal for a man to have a physical relationship with his wife, though it is physical in the flesh, but it is carnal for him to have a like relationship with his neighbor's wife, for that is essentially motivated and dishonors God's holiness. This is how God sees carnality in the church. He sees it as his church actually fooling around on him, his bride being unfaithful to him. The example of the Gibeonites. There's a message I preached a few times. You may be able to find it online, called Building and Battling with the Gibeonites. It greatly illustrates how carnality works its way into the church and then into relationships in the church. These next few verses do not say much when interpreted by themselves, but when the history behind them is exposed, they illustrate greatly how ungodliness and carnality not only want to be in our lives, but also want to take charge of us. And next to them, Melatiah the Gibeonite, Jadon the Meronothite, the men of Gibeon and Mizpah, repaired the residence of the governor of the region beyond the river. Nehemiah 3:7. And Ishmaiah the Gibeonite, a mighty man among the 30 and over the 30, 1 Chronicles 12:4. These Gibeonites were a people that the Israelites were supposed to have defeated and then cast out of the land of Canaan. But now they were the ones in the forefront, the builders and the fighters in the nation. Why? They had tricked their way into the nation, but they did not stop there. Originally, they were accepted as servants, but after some time, they were in the forefront, leading the way. I'm not questioning their individual conversion. I'm only illustrating how they work their way in and then work their way up into having the ability to direct the nation. It is a picture of carnality seeking the way to rule the church. Background of the Gibeonites. They were Canaanites who are actually symbolic of a people who were anti-God. They were not the seed of Abraham, Israel. They were descendants of Ham in Canaan, Genesis 10:15 through 17. Ham was the one that sinned with his father. And the king called the Gibeonites and said unto them, now the Gibeonites were not of the children of Israel, but of the remnant of the Amorites, and the children of Israel had sworn unto them. 2 Samuel 21:2. They were a greater nation than Israel. When the Lord your God brings you into the land which you go to possess, and has cast out many nations before you, the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than you. Deuteronomy 7:1. They were uncircumcised, Genesis 34:1, 2, and 14 through 19. They were Hivites. There was not a city that made peace with the children of Israel except the Hivites, the inhabitants of Gibeon. All the others they took in battle, Joshua 11:19. The nation of Israel was commanded to cast them out of Canaan. Now the Lord spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan, across from Jericho, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you have crossed the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you. Destroy all their engraved stones, destroy all their molten images, and demolish all their high places. You shall dispossess the inhabitants of the land and dwell in it. For I have given you the land to possess, and you shall divide the land by lot as an inheritance among your families. To the larger you shall give a larger inheritance, and to the smaller you shall give a smaller inheritance. There everyone's inheritance shall be whatever falls on him by lot. You shall inherit according to the tribes of your fathers. But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall be that those whom ye let remain shall be irritations in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they shall harass you in the land where you dwell. Moreover, it shall be that I will do to you as I thought to do to them. Numbers 33:50 through 56. God was specific about how he would drive them out. So you shall serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and your water, and I will take sickness away from the midst of you. No one shall suffer miscarriage or be barren in your land. I will fulfill the number of your days. I will send my fear before you. I will cause confusion among all the people to whom you come, and will make all your enemies turn their backs to you. And I will send hornets before you, which shall drive out the Hivite, the Canaanite, and the Hittite from before you. Exodus 23:25 through 28. The characteristics of the Gibeonites. They were craftily. But when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, they worked craftily and went and pretended to be ambassadors, and they took old sacks and their donkeys, old wineskins, turn and mend it. Joshua 9:3 and 4. They are deceivers. Old and patched sandals on their feet, and old garments on themselves, and all the bread of their provision was dry and moldy. Joshua 9:5. They are liars. And they went to Joshua to the camp of Gilgal, and said to him and to the men of Israel, we have come from a far country. Now therefore make a covenant with us. Joshua 9:6. They are compromisers. Then the men of Israel said to the Hivites, perhaps you dwell among us. So how can we make a covenant with you? But they said to Joshua, we are your servants. And Joshua said to them, who are you, and where do you come from? They said to him, from a very far country your servants have come. because of the name of the Lord your God. For we have heard of his fame and all that he did in Egypt. Joshua 9, 7-9. The league. Joshua and the Israelites fell for their trickery and made a covenant with the idea to bring them in as servants. But it did not stay there. The real issue was that the league they made was before God and they could not get out of it. For the Gibeonites, what God did or did not do was not a concern. And we never see that God did anything to them, other than he held his own people accountable to the covenant they had made with this unsaved and ungodly people. Even King David, who was king many years later and had nothing to do with the agreement between Joshua and the Gibeonites, was held accountable to the covenant and could not hurt them or get rid of them. Now there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year. And David inquired of the Lord. And the Lord answered, "It is because of Saul and his bloodthirsty house, because he killed the Gibeonites." So the king called the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites were not of the children of Israel, but of the remnant of the Amorites. The children of Israel had sworn protection to them. But Saul had sought to kill them in his zeal for the children of Israel in Judah. Therefore David said to the Gibeonites, "What shall I do for you? And with what shall I make atonement, that you may bless the inheritance of the Lord?" And the Gibeonites said to him, "We will have no silver or gold from Saul or from his house, nor shall you kill any man in Israel for us." So he said, "Whatever you say, I will do for you." Then they answered the king, "As for the man who consumed us and plotted against us, that we should be destroyed from remaining in any of the territories of Israel, let 7 men of his descendants be delivered to us, and we will hang them before the Lord in Gibeah of Saul, whom the Lord chose." And the king said, "I will give them." 2 Samuel 21, 1-6. This is often the issue in the churches. They allow carnal people or things to come into the church, not just to see if they indeed are willing to believe and personally be converted to the Christian faith, but as servants in the church with the intent to do more or make their own ways easier. Many people have dropped their standards and allowed carnal Hollywood entertainment to come into their home because it offered itself as a babysitter, an entertainer, a lifter of burden, a relaxer, etc. And now carnality is actually ruling the home and the devil is gaining his working territory. People sell their spiritual discernment when they compromise God's standard. Holiness is not just something for people to get some relief from sin and guilt and experience some freedom. It is a way of the Christian life and is only achieved through honoring God's standards. As he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, because it is written, "Be holy, for I am holy." And if you call on the Father, who without partiality judges according to each one's work, conduct yourselves throughout the time of your stay here in fear, knowing that you were not redeemed with corruptible things like silver or gold from your aimless conduct received by tradition from your fathers, but with the precious blood of Christ as a lamb without blemish and without spot. 1 Peter 1, 25-19. The Gibeonites started as servants, but it did not stay there. With time, they worked their way into Israel, and years later, they were in the forefront, building and battling with them. Those so-called servants are received with the idea to diminish the workload, to provide a mere relaxed atmosphere, to ease the guilt in the conscience, to have free time with God, and so forth. But the opposite happens. They actually take the time, the intention, and intensify life as a whole. It is like people who bring in television to entertain the children, but it only takes a short time until they are addicted to some show and no longer have time to read the Bible, go to church, or have family time and training. Carnal churches that have adopted this mentality of, let's make it a bit easier. Let's not make issues about upholding godly standards. Let's use carnal means for God's work. Never seem to have anything to give toward God's work. And the people that go into God's work do not come from these churches. All the means and time have to be spent on keeping the people happy, or supposedly happy. People will sign a 25-year loan to buy a house without much thought, but they won't commit to a regular soul-winning time. They commit to 5-day work weeks, but cannot be faithful to church. It is good to have commitments and be faithful at work, providing for one's family. But one must be careful that one does not make leagues that will rob one of all the necessities to live for the Lord and will eventually start running one's life. The deception. They did not seek counsel from the Lord. Then the men of Israel took some of their provisions, but they did not ask counsel of the Lord. Joshua 9:14. They fell for the "we will be your servants" trick. Joshua 9:6-24. We often think that we have to have servants, people and things that serve us in order for us to serve the Lord. But what people do for me, even when that is part of God's work, is not my service to the Lord, but theirs. We must free ourselves, our time, our commitments, our relationships, etc., to be free to serve the Lord. But we do not need to have servants for us to be a servant for God. For example, I spent an hour preparing and presenting a speech on a specific topic, but I had many people working for me for many hours to do all the research. Who is the true servant? God is not as concerned about how many people serve me as he is about me serving him. Now, there is nothing wrong with a process like that. It is just that we must not consider ourselves great servants because we are in the forefront of some great act or work. What people do for you can in part free you to serve God according to what he has called you to do. But that is not your service. It is theirs. And that is not what makes one a profitable servant. We often do not serve God because we do not think we are equipped for it. I must have such and such for me to serve the Lord successfully or to be a profitable servant. But that is not the case. Jesus demonstrated this in his earthly ministry. He had no position, no possessions, no office or place, no support, and he influenced the entire world. Yes, he is God, but he did that as a man. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. Mark 10:45. They tricked him first. In Genesis 24:1-2, 13-19, 25-26, we can read the story of Jacob and his crew on the way back to Bethel. But after they met Esau on the way, Jacob decided to reroute the crew. They ended up by a town called Succoth, where the Hivites lived. One of the headmen, Shechem, the son of Hamor, the head of the city, took advantage of Dinah, Jacob's daughter, and fell in love with her. He wanted to marry her, but there was a conflict because they were Hivites, uncircumcised, and were therefore not Abraham's offspring and outside of God's promise. But Jacob and his boys made a compromise with them. If they would also get circumcised like Jacob and his family had been, then they could marry each other's daughters. However, Jacob's sons, especially Simon and Levi, had no intentions to follow through with the agreement. So they went into the city after the meeting, as all the people of the city were thinking they were preparing to work together with Jacob's people and were planning a wedding between Shechem and Dinah, and killed all the men of the city. They tricked them, and years later the trick came back to them. The Gibeonites who tricked Israel were of the Hivites who had been tricked by them many years before. That is how it works with God. Trickery brings trickery. The key to not being deceived is not to deceive. Manipulation, deception, and trickery only set people up to fall for the very same thing. Not only that, but to use it, it is surely going to bring it back, and it will be a trap. The Israelites reaped what they sowed, and they had laid the foundation for how they were going to be treated. They had done their own groundwork for what would blind them to the deception coming their way. It is when we use trickery that we lose discernment. The ways of the devil, the world, and the flesh are easily recognized to those who only operate in truth and honesty, but unrecognizable to those who use them themselves. Carnal people don't know that they are carnal, for carnality does not identify itself. Only spirituality will expose it. And therefore, carnal churches do not see their own ways for what they are. They continuously make deals with the world, with carnal people, and often even with the devil, thinking they have saved God some great cost and have become his profitable servants, while all they did was fall for their own trick. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxieties, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Psalms 139, 23 and 24. Signs and segments of carnal direction. Boards, committees, organizations, and memberships. There are teachings, beliefs, and practices that come into the church with the mindset that in order for something to be from God or separate from all rebellion and humanism, it has to be discussed, considered, and then judged by some association or body of people. Generally, the idea behind it is that there is more authority and accountability. The belief is often that two people have more authority than one, and the greater the number of individuals, the more authority there is behind it. That in of itself declares that the authority is rooted in humanity, in carnality, and not in God. God never gives equal authority to two or more individuals in the same task or commission. Now, counsel should be sought before decisions are made. Anyone that never does that surely places himself in danger of becoming self-righteous, proud, rebellious, and even foolish. But there is something I would challenge you to search out deeply in the scriptures and in prayer. The more individuals are involved in a decision, the more carnal it is, and the more it compromises God's standard. This is generally how the church starts following carnal direction. We cannot say yes or no to the Holy Spirit until it is considered and approved by certain individuals, some board or a committee. Anyone that walks closely with God and has a good understanding of the scriptures knows that it is the democratic devil that is the idol of this belief and practice. Let's get rid of God in the name of human regulation and government. The Antichrist will use that system to take the majority of the church. We must remember that the difference between a carnal human and a spiritual human is only the connection from which he draws his influence, power, authority, support, and confidence. Most people go this route, not because they want to be carnal, but because they are carnal. They have no faith and no confidence in God and fear the disapproval of other people. It is a sense of security for them. We are all prone that way. We naturally lack assurance and courage in standing with God as individuals. But that is how people get into the heart of God and have the authority to uphold his standards. I would challenge anyone to search out how compromise enters the church. It is generally through associated decisions or leaders too consumed with the wants and wishes of the followers. Programs, promotions, and propaganda. It is wise to seek the Lord's will on the order of service, whether that is one individual service or a general way for a ministry to function. But to replace direct God-given direction with a program is surely opening the door for the ministry to be led by carnality. The human wisdom behind a program is simply this. It only takes a bit of extra work to set it up, but then it runs the show with only a small level of human involvement. The thinking is this: I can do so much more and have to be so much less involved to accomplish the task at hand. The truth is, a well-designed program will run things well with very little human involvement. But the danger is the open door for the roots of carnality to grow into plants under the atmosphere. One may reason that less human charge means less chance of carnality to work its way in. For carnality is simply humanity without God. We must be reminded that it is not wrong to be carnal, for we all have this carnal flesh that we live in all the time. But carnality is an open door and a direct connection to a very ungodly and animalistic influence. And where God does not guide, the way of carnality surely will. So, it is not the absence of humanity that deactivates carnality, but the absence of spirituality that does that. We must oversee God's work and be completely involved, but only as God oversees us and has complete leadership in our lives. It is prayer, not programs. It is proclamation, not promotion. Many churches seek to sell the message, sell membership, sell the surrendered life. This is simply promotion and competing with the world's market. As the scriptures teach concerning the preaching and teaching of the gospel in the word of God to the ends of the world, it is not a matter of announcing, informing, or telling the story of the good news. Those are only tag-along aspects of preaching the gospel. Rather, it is a matter of proclaiming and demonstrating the gospel in the power of the Holy Spirit. It is more a matter of clarifying than informing, for the entire world has its forms of salvation that it hopes in already. People already have the conscience, creation, and, in many cases, law. What the world needs is Holy Spirit-filled preaching that will clear out all false hope and humanistic forms of belief. Simply running programs, promoting the message, or distributing propaganda is not going to deal properly with ungodliness and carnality. It is only destined to build a carnal church. Manipulations and briberies. Religious and carnal people, especially leaders, have sought to trick and bribe people into heaven, or at least into their own organizations and support groups. God actually does the exact opposite. He frees trapped prisoners of sin and uncontrollable appetites and then gives them the truth needed to understand right and wrong decision, and also gives them the liberty to choose either or. No trickery or trapping, no manipulation or bribery. People must be presented with the freedom to choose, even when that choice may be against the very freedom they have been presented with. That is what our God does and requires of his servants. Carnality always wants to get ahead, get into position, get rid of all its opposition. And manipulation and bribery are its only tools to do so. The way is often this: let's just give people enough information to make a decision without them actually knowing the consequences of that choice. Let's not preach and teach the entirety of the Bible, for that is too scary for people and they will walk away. In order to trick them into a decision, we must only give them the positive aspect of the faith and promise them some kind of bribe in the name of benefits. It is simply carnality directing the church. Mixing ministry and business. I find it interesting that God's servants would place a copyright on what God has given them. They write a book, tract, or article and place a copyright on it. They treat the ministry like a business, selling the product and protecting the assets. Buy the truth and do not sell it. Also wisdom and instruction and understanding, Proverbs 23:23. We can pay a price to gain truth, wisdom and instruction and understanding. We ought not to charge for giving it. It is not a business, but a ministry. How does God deal with his word? In-house preservation. He keeps a copy of it at home. Forever, O Lord, your word is settled in heaven. Psalms 119:89. Word so secure, sure, established and settled it in heaven that when there is any confusion about it on earth, one can always confirm it in heaven. How? Through the person and ministry of the Holy Spirit. John 14:26, 15:26. When we write something, it is always good to keep a copy of it at home. For there may be people who want to make you say things you never did, and you can show them what you wrote. The right copy must not be on the field, but at home. Another thing is franchising the church. Many times God leads a person to ministry in an area and a church is established. But then this person wants to franchise that church. He wants to send people from his church into other areas of the world to reproduce what God did there and place his name on it and promote his favorite set of doctrine. The church is the fruit of evangelism, not the method for it, and surely not a franchise church. It is like making the apple the agent over the apple tree. The tree has to be fully functional before the apple will come forth. And evangelism was fully functional before churches came forth. The Holy Spirit is the agent that oversees evangelism. Luke 24:44-49, Acts 1:5-8.